Is there life on Mars?
As you probably noticed, there's a Martian think tank. Well, it's an image that was beamed back from Spirit rover just before it terminated in 2003, I think. You know, it's caused lots of debates. You've probably seen it yourself and wondered what it is. Is it a pile of stones? What is it? Well, there's a lot of questions that can be answered with the help of Bob here, which is why I've done this whole Finding Bob thing, because it's a very big story and it's very much to do with Mars as well. So say there was a dimensional link between Mars and Earth, a tear occurred, because if Mars was positioned inside Earth, so to speak, but you know that's where they correspond. They're in separate spaces in the universe, but in terms of the unified field, let's say, they correspond in the same space proportionally. And Mars is smaller than Earth, so if there was a hole on the surface of Mars, it might correspond, as would appear to to suggest, that about 3,000 kilometers below the surface of Earth, this hole would have opened up, which would have been water hitting magma. It would have exploded. The water would have come up. There would have been a split would have occurred. It would have then come out, and after the water, after and during the water transiting from Mars to Earth, you would have had this huge, great tear where magma would have then come up also and spread across in all ways. Once that tear had been created over the old floor and all the landmass that had existed there, you know, everything would have been buried, or just it would have been under the magma that was spilling out from this tear. And is there any evidence of a wave where we could see, you know, we could see how a wave of magma had actually travelled across the entire half the planet, creating the Pacific Basin? And here we have the most incredible geological feature. It's called the Sandwich Islands, and I call it the little lizard. It looks like a little lizard's head. So on the west of this image, left, you have the Pacific and the Pacific Basin there. Above there, you've got the lower tip of South America coming down there, and then at the bottom there, most south, you've got Antarctica, and you can literally see how there's been a sea of magma that has broken through there and butted up and created the Andes in South America, and spilt through this space and finally come to a stop at this point where it's obviously been cooled by this flow of water that's also there, that's been slowing it down as it's been going. And it's whatever's occurred, it's consumed half our planet. It just stares us in the face. And that to me is Bob Dobbs. That's subgenius truth. That's the truth that exists beyond the truth that we're being given, the truth that stares me in the face, the subgenius truth. And that's what Bob's all about. Subgenius, it's about seeing beyond the belief mechanisms which bind us from seeing what stares at us. And if we can see what's happened here, if we can see this whole story, if we've got the courage to see the whole story, then we might be able to see what the Large Hadron Collider actually is. It's got exactly what it is written on the packet. It's intending to make a very big bang, and the only thing that makes very, very big bangs are bombs. And this was basically a bomb. This was a big enough bomb that it can actually, that's what caused this whole thing. That's what we're trying to do with this fission obsession of taking these two units of energy in the Large Hadron Collider and smashing them together to try and create the point of occurrence of the Big Bang. It's a bomb. That's what it is. This is what it does. It's the reversal of creation. That's this whole obsession with war, and that's what I believe is playing out with Europe right now. That's why I do my whole Bob thing. Is, you know, this is my whole story of Bob when I discovered Bob, and this kind of head state that you can enter, which, you know, in this show I've called it the Martian think tank. This ability to sort of put your mind into something which is beyond your belief mechanisms, so you can see a bigger picture of what's unfolding here, and where we're being subverted. We're being seriously subverted. And we know whoever lived on Mars, they lived in the oceans. 20,000 books were added to the to the Paris Library on Atlantis after the Second World War because of all the sightings of underwater cities. And then we've got the corroborating testimony of our ancient scriptures, which is what Emmanuel Veliskowski really was the centre of his research, really. The fact there was no Venus in the night sky of the ancients, and there was a great flood. Mu talks about, in the ancient Chinese text, it says that the flood came, 4.5 kilometres above the present sea level on the Chinese side of the Himalayas, and then on the Indian side of the Himalayas, you have the Sanskrit tales of Manu, and then you've got, the ancient Greek tales. You've got but before we even start getting to the biblical tales, and we've got so much corroborating testimony of a massive flood of beyond your wildest proportions. And this geological feature, we have to consider this geological feature, the Emperor Hawaiian Seamount chain, because it's brand new. The first thing we've got to do is kind of start on a bedrock of something which you could get your head around as being fact. But what do we actually know about Mars, where we could start, where it could really give us some key foundation ideas of what's really been happening? And so we'll go to the bedrock. Let's start at the actual bedrock of what we scientifically understand. There was an image that was beamed back by Mariner 9 Mars in 1971 of a geological feature called Valles Marianis. And Valles Marianis is extraordinary. It's absolutely beyond. It's beyond your wildest beliefs in size and geography. First thing is, it's a whopping 4,000 kilometers long, and it's it is perfectly straight, with what looks like a detonation hole in the middle. 4,000 kilometers long. That's like as big as one of our continents or something. It's 7 kilometers deep. Is just perfectly straight. It's an incredible fault line. And when it was discovered, before 1971, but the images that were taken with thermal imaging cameras picked up what is thorium and cesium in its last stages of decay, in its last stages of its half-life, so to speak, which is billions of years old. And the problem is, when you see cesium and thorium in their last stages of decay, they've got to be held in something, as they're just going to dissipate into the earth. And the only thing we know that can actually contain those deposits is zircon, because it weathers better than any other mineral. It's potentially the oldest mineral we know on the planet, on our planet, and on Mars. Except we haven't really got zircon. We've had traces, but we haven't really got zircon in the same amount of volume and to the same age as on Mars. Mars has got ancient zircon, and it's covered in zircon. It's got huge deposits, and zircon means fundamentally, it means several things, but it's the formation and how zircon forms. Zircon is formed when you have to have an ocean acting down on bedrock, and this is where we get our bedrock of kind of scientific fact. It is scientific fact, but you have water acting down on a bedrock, say basalt or just granite. This molten lava that's kind of that's solidified. Water acting down on that alone is not going to dissolve bedrock. But when carbon dioxide enters the picture, and carbon dioxide molecule joins a water molecule, H2O and CO2, you end up with carbonic acid, not to be confused with carbolic acid. Carbonic acid, and the carbonic acid will separate the calcium atom in the lattice of the bedrock and produce calcium bicarbonate. But what you'll actually get is this process will be absorbing carbon dioxide, enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, as the actual granite rock gets broken down, and then water is forced down into this dissolving bedrock, and it takes a lot of the silicates, which are quite fine. Well, one of the finest, not as fine as carbon, but a fine element, which is taking. Now, if you were to melt silicon, you obviously produce things like glass and what have you. But when you've got the enormous pressure of an ocean pushing these fine silicates through this dissolving bedrock, and then you've got the heat, not from the core but below the actual crust, is obviously molten. So that heat is these two are colliding together, and And water is very explosive. It's hydrogen and oxygen, and at those temperatures it could very easily explode, except for if there's an enormous pressure, then a new process can begin to occur, which is where the zircon fuses with the oxygen from the water, and you get this formation of crystals growing atom by atom, not being melted together as such, but literally forming a lattice and growing. And that's crystalline formations. And that, like I say, that can only happen under a very, very deep ocean. And considering Mars has got 1/3 of the gravity to Earth, thereabouts, you would need enormous oceans acting down on its surface to create the volume of zircon that it has. You can't get around that, and you can't get around the fact that it would have not only had deep oceans, but it would have had carbon dioxide exhaling life in those oceans. The two go hand in hand. Yes, you've got other, great releases of potential releases of carbon dioxide. There's signs of volcanoes, but we're talking about billions of years of a constant supply of carbon dioxide to create this. And so Mars had plenty of oceans, that's not denied. It was called the Noachian periods in Mars's history. I'm not too sure why it's called Noachian periods, but that's what it's called. So we don't need to be kind of speculating on whether there was life on Mars with our scientific facts, and this is kind of what's important to understand here. We're beyond that in our science now. We can go further than that. We can not just say there was life, really. We can, and fantastic life. We don't have to be saying there's microbes and everything else like that. The evidence is just too fantastic, especially the fault line of what seems to have terminated Mars. Now, we're told that the water evaporated. Water evaporation, you've got problems there, because loose hydrogen that aren't connected to an oxygen as a water molecule would have without a great enough gravity, they would have just floated away, and without an atmosphere, as we've been led to believe, we can understand that it could have just floated out into space. But that's true also of Earth. Hydrogen's too light for Earth's gravity. But nonetheless, there's so many other relationships that the hydrogen can get involved with that it doesn't leave the party, so to speak. Any H2 that does actually finally get free from all the sort of like other bonding potential activity it could get involved with, and it manages to escape that net. What goes up and hits the O3, and O3 is formed with an electromagnetic energy field which makes 3 sets of O2 jump into 2 sets of O3, which is ozone, a very, very unstable oxidant. And if when a meteorite hits O3, it would just get oxidized in nanoseconds. And so what would happen is the H2 would just hit that and get zapped immediately, become a water molecule with its added atomic density, would fall back to either Mars or Earth. And now we find that these stories that actually the atmosphere is a lot more bluer on Mars than we've been led to believe, and this is causing a bit of a stir, because that means the water didn't evaporate. Because if it's, potentially it's so cold on Mars, if there had been oceans there, they would have frozen way before they evaporated. But nonetheless, there you have it. It's the oceans are gone. They've gone somewhere. We see on Earth where seas have evaporated, we see these very smooth surfaces that are so smooth you could be doing land speed records on them, and they do. And you wouldn't be trying that on Mars. It's just it's torn to pieces. The terrain is absolutely torn to pieces. So where did the water go? Where did the water go? The water had to have gone somewhere. So you're looking, if you wanted to find where the water went, and you're willing to sort of open your mind to a kind of a dimensional concept, and we can open our minds to dimensional concepts again with films like Pacific Rim and like I say, books like Matter by Ian Banks, and sort of like many other sort of books are coming out now. The Northern Lights was another sort of book that was, and film. Golden Compass was another great story about dimensionalism. So can we look at any scientific evidence of dimensionalism in what we've been discovering just lately? Well, we've just discovered the torsion fields, and Einstein was of a mind that once you find all torsion fields, you've got the connection, because it's like a gravitational force travelling in a linear motion that connects planetary masses. And so when you find that, it's just like bingo. You've really got a kind of you have a new kind of perspective, a new event horizon, if you like, to witness the world and the universe through. And then of course you've got you've had the discovery of torsion field, and then you've probably heard about the experiments with quantum entanglement, where we've separated the smallest particles. You've separated the electrons from the atom and the protons and neutrons, and we've broken those down into the smallest particles, which is what a big part of what the Large Hadron Collider is all about. And we found that when we separate some of these particles, what we do with one, the other one does exactly at the same time, without any lag, indicating that there's a unified singularity between these 2 points that exists beyond the space in which they seem to occupy. That there's a it's a bit like picking up, you say you had a projector and you were projecting 2 dots with a projector. If I picked up the whole projector, the 2 dots would simultaneously move. And so we found our link to a primary unified field in this discovery. It transforms our level of science. We should be jumping up and down and rejoicing, because it's kind of the concept of Indra's net, which was in many ways the cradle of Buddhism, where you shine a light upon a cut ruby and it shines out everywhere, and that is all the history and everything. But actually the entirety of it exists, you could say, in the beam of light, but actually it's the source of the beam of light, which creates this kind of like multi-beams of images. And actually, ironically, multi-beam, that brings us straight to, where did the water go? So multi-beam, we look at this picture of the Emperor Hawaiian seamount chain, which before 2001 was simply the Emperor seamount chain. I mean, apparently our governments have known about the whole line of underwater volcanoes, they're called seamounts, that link the 2 biggest volcanoes on the planet by a single event. At the bottom down here on at the location of Hawaii, and that's the location of the largest volcano in the planet. And then the second largest, the largest in the northern hemisphere, is on the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is this arm that just drops down from Russia. So we've got this event that was picked up ironically by multi-beam, but actually beams of sound that are sent down to the floor of the ocean, and then received by receiving ships that construct an image of the sea floor by this information. So you've got this image that we see here, and I mean it's incredible. It's like I say, this is 4,600 kilometers long. It's an incredible geological feature. And then we've got the fact that the ocean floor, pretty much most of the ocean floor, covering most of the Pacific, apart from the Marianas Trench, which is obviously very deep, but that's a very small section. And apart from Hawaii and the Emperor Seamount Chain, you've got an ocean floor difference of about 2 kilometers thereabouts over the entire Pacific floor. I mean, how do you arrive to a place where granite becomes totally smooth nearly all over? I mean, how do you get to that unless the ocean floor was created in one fell swoop by a wave of magma that bled out from a single source? Again, it's and if our oceans had been there for 60 million years, we'd expect a much larger zircon presence, as by what's happened on Mars and what's happened on other places on Earth where there is the zircon presence, where there's definitely has been water on the planet for a very, very long time, but there's not enough on Earth to really kind of justify the amount of water that we've got. And that's a funny thing, and so we've got this problem with for me, it's a bit of a problem with the ocean floor. We've got some of the ideas that it's been created by a fault line that's been sort of ever opening out, but that's, you'd expect to be pushing, as you're pushing the ocean floor out like a conveyor belt, you'd expect a mountain to pop up somewhere, half a planet, before it actually does anything. It just goes out perfectly smooth. There's loads of, and then you've got at the top of this, the Emperor Hawaiian seamount chain, you've got what looks like a tail, almost like where to the left, going down from the Kamchatka Peninsula, you've got Japan and what have you, and then going off to the right, you've got Alaska and British Columbia, and coming down to Canada there. And if you were to sort of consider some of the things that Gary McGinnon was saying, claiming that he'd found information pertaining to, that it was all about the Senkaku Islands, and about how, which sit right on the Pacific Basin, and China want a landmass on the Pacific Basin, which gives them access to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that's what this big dispute is all about. And And obviously Hawaii is like the most. It's got 80% of America's long-range missiles. You know, makes the Pacific Basin the most protected place on the planet. When you would have thought America would be protecting American interests. Maybe that is America protecting their interests strictly from a geopolitical point of view. But you could also see that the Pacific Basin is the most protected place on the planet. And this talk, like back to Gary McGinnon talking about, you know, intellectual property being bought from intelligence within the Pacific Basin. You know, Velikovsky wrote Worlds in Collision after the Second World War in the 50s, and you know, his name, you probably have never heard of it. He was eradicated, and yet he was Einstein's best friend. And you know, I'm not new saying this. It's just that it needs to be brought together, and you know, Velikovsky would never, he had no idea of the Emphysema chain connecting these two volcanoes. It would have been everything he could have ever dreamed of. He had no idea that we would actually discover quantum entanglement, and he had no idea that he believed that we would no doubt probably find torsion fields. But all this evidence gives us the opportunity to see what we're seeing, and that is the subgenius truth, the truth that exists beyond our scientific peer review, the truth that stares us in the face. Rain. I feel like Noah saying it's going to rain, except that it's the other way around, guys. This is a play on our water. This is a very old funny thing that's playing out here, and it's an old game. You got to wake up and smell the coffee. The belief mechanisms which bind us from seeing what stares at us. And if we can see what's happened here, if we can see this whole story, if we've got the courage to see the whole story, then we might be able to see what the Large Hadron Collider actually is. It's got exactly what it is written on the packet. It's intending to make a very big bang, and the only thing that makes very, very big bangs are bombs. And this was basically a bomb. This was a big enough bomb that it can actually, that's what caused this whole thing. That's what we're trying to do with this fission obsession of taking these two units of energy in the Large Hadron Collider and smashing them together to try and create the point of occurrence of the Big Bang. It's a bomb. That's what it is. Once that tear had been created over the old floor and all the landmass that had existed there, you know, everything would have been buried, or just it would have been under this, under the magma that was spilling out from this tear. And is there any evidence of a wave where we could see, you know, we could see how a wave of magma had actually travelled across the entire half the planet, creating the Pacific Basin? And here we have the most incredible geological feature. It's called the Sandwich Islands. And I call it the little lizard. It looks like a little lizard's head. So on the west of this image, left, you have the Pacific and the Pacific Basin there. Above there, you've got the lower tip of South America coming down there. It was positioned inside Earth, so to speak. But you know, that's where they correspond. They're in separate spaces in the universe, but in terms of unified field, let's say, they correspond in the same space proportionally. And Mars is smaller than Earth, so if there was a hole on the surface of Mars, it might correspond, as would appear to to suggest, that about 3,000 kilometers below the surface of Earth, this hole would have opened up, which would have been water hitting magma. It would have exploded. The water would have come up, there would have been a split would have occurred. It would have then come out, and after the water after and during the water transiting from Mars to Earth, you would have had this huge great tear where magma would have then come up also and spread across in all ways. And then at the bottom there, most south, you've got Antarctica, and you can literally see how there's been a sea of magma that has broken through there and butted up and created the Andes in South America, and spilt through this space and finally come to a stop at this point where it's obviously been cooled by this flow of water that's also there, that's been slowing it down as it's been going. And it's whatever's occurred, it's consumed half our planet. It just stares us in the face. And that to me is Bob Dobbs. That's subgenius truth. That's the truth that exists beyond the truth that we're being given, the truth that stares me in the face, the subgenius truth. And that's what Bob's all about. Subgenius. It's about seeing beyond.
Is there life on Mars?
As you probably noticed, there's a Martian think tank. Well, it's an image that was beamed back from Spirit rover just before it terminated in 2003, I think. You know, it's caused lots of debates. You've probably seen it yourself and wondered what it is. Is it a pile of stones? What is it? Well, there's a lot of questions that can be answered with the help of Bob here, which is why I've done this whole Finding Bob thing, because it's a very big story and it's very much to do with Mars as well. So say there was a dimensional link between Mars and Earth, a tear occurred, because if Mars